For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Blakely, and I'm the founder of Entrepreneurs Collective. So I'm here to welcome you to our next event as part of Springboard 2021. We know last year was a tough year, and this one has started pretty tough too for most startups. So what we wanted to do is we want to put a series of 15 free events for not only our members, but also for founders generally to help them kick off their 2021 with a strong start. So we have 15 different workshops, some pitch events and networking sessions, which you can all sign up to. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and the Entrepreneurs Collective. So I'm actually a lawyer by trade, but I went a bit rogue a few years ago and decided to set up a dating app. So I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I'd never built a product before. I'd never fundraised. I'd never managed a team. So I encountered all sorts of problems. Where do you get referrals from? How do you find good developers? Daniel, next slide. Where do you source investment from? And then when I went out there, actually, I found that there was a lot of bad quality events. So you'd go to these events, there'd be, not that many founders. Everyone was trying to sell you things. There wasn't really that sort of community there for founders. And that's why I got together with some of my founder friends, and we started putting on our own events. So we'd pool our investors, and we'd put pitch competitions on, and we quickly were getting 50, 100 investors coming to our pitch competitions. And that's where sort of EC really kicked off, which was along the mission that we have, still the same mission now, which is founders helping founders. So what we try and do is if there's any pain points that you have, then we try and help you. And we do this through things such as events. We give away credits. So if you're using AWS, we can give you £10,000 worth of AWS credits. If you're using Stripe, we can give you some Stripe credits. There's a whole range of things. We have mentors. We have great sponsors who will give you free consultations, and a whole number of other benefits. And we're very lucky tonight to be hosting one of our workshops, but this is, as I say, is part of our series. We have another one on Thursday, which is the wealth management workshop for investors and for also founders, or generally anyone who has some funds that they're looking to invest or look after. But now, less about EC. I'm going to now turn over and introduce to our speaker tonight, which we're very privileged to have Ritam with us, and Studio Graphene. Now, Studio Graphene have been working with as one of our sponsors, and we're very proud to have them. We would never take on a sponsor which we didn't feel is an expert in their area, and who we wouldn't be proud to use ourselves. Studio Graphene have worked with a number of our members. They do excellent work from UX, UI to development. And we're very lucky because Ritam and his team have been remote working since before it was cool, or I guess since before the pandemic came, with a remote team that he's been managing for a number of years. So this is something that he's been doing for a long time, and he's going to give us some great insights on how to get the best out of our team. Ritam, are you there? And can we get you guys to share your screen? Perfect.
I'll share my screen.
Okay. In terms of questions, please do put them in the chat. We will leave a bit of time at the end to answer questions. But we may answer some as we go along, but feel free to chip in with some questions. Over to you, Ritam.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
So hi, everyone. So first, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Ritam. I'm the founder of Studio Graphene, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues. I'll let them introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everyone. My name's Deepak. I'm a product manager at Studio Graphene.
Johnny.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan, also a product manager at Studio Graphene.
Cool, thank you. So the three of us are going to be talking to you about how we manage a distributed product team. So this is in the context of trying to build a digital product and doing so with a team that's across multiple geographies, before the pandemic in different offices, but obviously now working remotely from home as well. So yeah, we'll kick off. A little bit of background on who we are. So as Mike alluded to, we've had a lot of experience designing and building blank canvas products. We're a team of 85 interdisciplinary engineers, designers, product managers, marketeers, working across 4 different countries and 3 different time zones. And over the last 6 years, we worked on probably over 150 or maybe even close to 200 different startup projects. We've been getting better. We are still learning. There's a long way to go, but our premise is that we want to help bring ideas to life rather than just talk about them. And we don't think that innovation needs to be scary, expensive, or slow. A little bit about our team. A lot of our we're headquartered in London, so our product management, our design, our marketing, our sales, and all our kind of support functions like finance, etc., based out of London. We also have a developer, really, just one developer in Geneva, Piero, who was the first employee at Studio Graphene and moved there. We have a team of over 55 engineers and analysts in New Delhi. And then we also have an engineering team and a design team in Lisbon. And this team's been working across different time zones, etc., together for many years. Lisbon being the most recent one over the last sort of 13, 14 months. But we've been used to working across a distributed model in different offices, etc. So that's really the premise of what we're trying to share with you during this workshop, is talk a little bit about how we've managed that process internally. So a little bit in terms of the agenda that we'll follow to run through this. We're going to first talk about some of the challenges and how you can potentially work around them. Focus on why culture is such a big deal and how to manage it when you're remote. Talk about the key tools and resources that we've used and we think that everyone might find useful and how we've leveraged them. A little bit on our communication policies and how we make sure that we're still communicating and talking to each other whilst we're sitting behind screens. And then lastly, we thought we'll share a few stories around how we've tried to adapt under the circumstances and how even though you put things in place, you need to kind of change and adapt as things go along. So I'll kick off by talking a little bit about the challenges and really, you know, what we've noticed, especially over the last year or so, is that even though there are a lot of benefits of us not having to commute into work, etc., but there's also a lot of challenges and drawbacks. There's a reason why people come into an office. So we really want to work on how we can help address those. I'll start with the environment. So this is a big factor. The first one I've listed is a good internet connection. This was probably the biggest thing that, biggest challenge that we faced in the beginning. We realized that it's incredible, literally across every geography and every country, this was a problem. And it was either to do with someone's connection at home or based on the location they were in, etc. So literally within the first couple of weeks, we tried to fix this. So we tried sending out different internet dongles or anything, you know, boosters, anything that would help ensure people had a good internet connection. I think without this, you literally, the fundamentals are broken to remote working. It sounds basic, but it's so crucial to make sure that, you know, everyone working remotely tests their speed and make sure they have a stable and speedy internet connection. The next bit was a good desk setup. So we realized, you know, sitting on a bed or on a sofa doesn't really make it possible to work effectively. And after a few months, I think, we decided that we'd set up a budget for everyone to procure a monitor or a desk or a chair or anything that they thought would make sure that they have a robust setup to kind of mirror an office environment. And then the last bit in terms of environment is all around a distraction-free environment. We noticed a lot of folks who, let's say, had flatmates who were furloughed and weren't working, or had kids that weren't going to school, etc., were struggling. And so we kind of tried to work around how, what was it to do with timings, or how could they work in a distraction-free environment. In terms of some of the things that aren't necessarily things you can avoid when you're working in a remote environment, but we've kind of tried to work on some workarounds for those challenges. So when you're working in different time zones, it's obviously challenging because you've got limited overlap in terms of having calls, etc. So what we did was we tried to actually use time zones to our advantage. So for instance, if you have an engineering team in a time zone that's a few hours ahead, can you ensure that you do your calls with them in the morning your time, and also can they leverage the fact that they are a few hours ahead to be able to do things like production releases when in the UK it's kind of downtime or middle of the night or early in the morning. So leveraging and working around different time zones, we found that it's important to have a structure and set expectations around when you're normally going to do, let's say, stand-ups, and when you're going to do production releases, when you're going to kind of send details for tickets that the engineers can work on the next day, etc. And then the other bit which you need to work around is the challenge with providing face-to-face feedback. There are different statistics around this, but some people argue that 90% of communications are kind of within the body language that you convey, and you can't have that over a Zoom call. And it's really it makes it hard. Yes, you can have your video on, etc., but it makes it really hard to provide feedback. So we've tried to kind of, and it's also not a natural process to kind of go on a Zoom call and provide feedback. Somehow naturally it happens more face to face. So we've tried to use tools. For instance, we tried Culture Amp, and we're trying to push feedback through Culture Amp just so that people remember to give each other feedback. You also don't stand around a desk and have a natural conversation. And I think what's happened is that people have had kind of an overkill of Zoom calls to try and address it, to proactively address it. And I don't think that works. I think you need to allow for more sporadic conversations. So, for real time to reach out on Slack or have a Zoom call. But I think trying to address that by just bombarding people with recurring Zoom invites is not the solution. And then the last bit that we realized was quite important was that as people were, especially during the lockdown when there wasn't anything else to do, people weren't really distinguishing between their work time and their personal life. And I think, again, you have to just proactively, it's not easy to work around it. And I know people will have challenges where maybe in the afternoon they can't work because their kids are not at school and they work in the evening, etc. But I think having a routine and structure is the other thing that we realized is really important as a workaround to some of the challenges. I'll pass on to Deepak to chat about culture.
Hello, everyone. So for this section, I'm going to talk about our culture. So for us, we had to start off the switch to being a completely remote working company by laying down the foundations of what we thought was the most important to us, which is culture. So team culture is a safe environment. Oh, sorry, still on the last slide, Rotem. Team culture is a safe environment in which everyone can be themselves, make mistakes, and grow. It's definitely hard to create culture when you're in a remote team, but it's still possible. Next slide, please. So when you have a remote team, being social is much more important, but it's also harder to achieve. To keep the team connected and the culture alive, you need to actively schedule in the social interactions. By blocking out your team's diaries, you're not only making sure it happens, but this also gives your team a valid excuse for a break. So as Ritam touched upon, breaks might be harder to do at home. Sometimes you get lost in your work, and then the line between work and home life gets blurred. Some examples of our COVID-19 friendly socials at Studio Graphene include, as you can see on the right, a little screenshot from our virtual Christmas party that we did end of last year. We did our 5th anniversary virtually as well. Studio Graphene turns 5, so that was an online event. We've also done virtual lunches. We've done team building games and quizzes. These were optional opt-in, which gives the team more flexibility around joining in during working hours, depending on how busy they are. And then finally, also internal office catch-ups, keep in touch calls, all hands, product demos. These were a lot more frequent since we've gone completely remote. Next slide, please. So second point is trust. One of the main concerns of remote working is thinking that your teammates may end up, slacking off because they are unsupervised in their home environment. However, most of the time, it's actually quite the opposite. It's been found that a big issue is actually not knowing when to stop working. When transitioning to remote working, you're trusting your colleagues to deliver the same quality of work at home as they would have done if they were in the office. So one way you can verify this is happening is through feedback metrics. These metrics usually rely heavily on your teammates also delivering high quality work. So this emphasis on teamwork means each individual will hold each other accountable. We'll touch on this feedback point just a little bit later. But just to summarize on trust, therefore, by trusting your team to work where and how they are most productive, you're giving them the autonomy and a sense of responsibility in delivering their work. Next slide, please. New starters. So transitioning from a physical office to a remote working one is a challenge in itself, but then recruiting and building your team remotely is, without even meeting them face to face, is another challenge entirely. So at Studio Graphene, we've had to recruit almost a quarter of our new team across all of our offices remotely. So this makes laying down the foundations of our company culture even harder. Some examples of how we have done this. So as you can see on the right, we usually do an introductory Slack blog post from our HR team, which is then followed by a barrage of welcome messages from the entire company to welcome them. We also have our all hands interactions. So during our weekly all hands, which right now is bifurcated by each office, each country, so it makes it a little bit more personal. The new employees on these calls get a chance to introduce themselves face to face on Zoom. And then we also started playing these icebreaking games during these calls at the beginning of each all hands, which is a bit of fun for these calls. We're playing 2 truths and a lie, so it's resulted in some hilarious stories. For example, we found out our brand new head of marketing, who only recently joined, got into a fight with Tom Hardy at school. It's a little fun things like that. And then finally, the most effective is essentially project involvement. Getting stuck in. So getting stuck into a project, sharing a screen with works in progress, ideation, these are all key ways to get to know someone. So working and creating things together is like an integral part of creating a trusting and transparent working environment. Which leads me on to my next slide, which is feedback and transparency, which I touched upon earlier. So transparency is another extremely important thing when working with a remote team. Sharing ideas and thoughts can be very helpful. You can bounce them off your team to help minimize mistakes. And then when it comes to feedback, asking for and giving feedback is something that you will need to take advantage of when working remotely. Getting feedback can help tackle challenges and problem areas before they arise, because making the switch to remote working can result in new hurdles that we will have to tackle. So, for example, stuff that I'm sure that we've all had to deal with during lockdown: self-motivation, staying focused, feeling isolated and or lonely. So how can you highlight these problems with your team is to set up some new processes. So some processes that we at Studio Graphene have set up. Firstly, is regular one-to-one catch-ups with line managers. So this was something that we used to do, but now we're doing it more than what we had in place before. Also, we've started using a tool called CultureAmp. So CultureAmp is a HR platform where employees can ask for feedback, and they can anonymously fill out employee satisfaction surveys. Then any areas that are rated low are then reported to the management team to try and address. These results are also shared during our global all hands that we have once a month. So this is part of our like transparency and feedback point. So that was my final slide. I'll hand it over to Johnny now to talk about tools and resources.
Hi everyone, sorry, second time today I've not turned mute off. So yeah, I'm just going to run you through some of the tools and resources that we use at Studio Graphene from a kind of product management point of view, really. So look, I'm sure there's lots of tools out there. You don't have to use these tools, but these are the tools we have in place and would recommend. So next screen, Tom. So look, it's a given. I think communication is obviously extremely important, even more important when you're working with distributed teams. I think you need to err on the side of kind of over communication at all times. There's a more of a risk for misinterpretation when you're not in the office. So you've got to be extremely kind of clear when discussing requirements with colleagues. I think you've got to really factor in language skills of the teams that you're working with. So our engineers were based over in Delhi, and obviously English is not their first language. So when you're discussing project requirements, you need to be really kind of clear and concise what you're asking for them, so you don't have issues with the build down the line. In terms of kind of where we start with projects, the first kind of tool we use is a product called Harvest. So this is a tool that we use for all our forecasting of resources. So we have on our Friday, every Friday, we shall have a resourcing call, and we'll discuss all the resourcing requests from all our projects. So we communicate with the engineers what projects they're working on a weekly basis. They can see what projects they'll be on for the next week or the next quarter. We distribute this information via email or via Slack, and we kind of update this on a regular basis for all of the engineers. Regarding video conferencing, Zoom, obviously, I'm sure you're all sick of Zoom now, but we've been using it for a long time. A couple of obvious things when working with Zoom. Sorry, there's a lot of feedback from someone.
Someone not on mute?
I was actually going to come on to my first point regarding Zoom. It's a bit of an obvious one, really. A couple of key points. We always ask when we're on calls with engineers to go on mute when they're not speaking. Having cameras on, we try to encourage, because it's always easier when speaking face to face with someone, discussing requirements, because you can see their reactions and so on. But you've got to really take into consideration how comfortable people are with the cameras on. It's not the end of the world if you don't have your cameras on. And also sometimes if you've all got your cameras on, it can affect the quality of the call. So I think you've got to play it by ear, really, when it comes to having your cameras on. In terms of distractions, like Ritan mentioned earlier, kind of we ask when on calls to kind of turn off all your Slack notifications or other ways that could potentially distract you, so you got your full focus on the calls. As a PM, I think regarding kind of continuing on the Zoom theme, I think as a facilitator on calls, you need to kind of keep everyone engaged, and how you do that is different ways, but you've got to not let the loudest person who's on the call speak all the time. I think you've got to get everyone's opinion, because it can all be valuable. When you're on larger calls, utilize kind of breakout room features to kind of have smaller groups. Again, it comes in with keeping everybody engaged as well. And as we can see we're doing here, I think recording any important meetings is extremely valuable, so you can rewatch the call back. If you've missed anything or you need any further documentation, you can revert back to the video calls that you've done. And then, yeah, meeting minutes, obviously it's a given, really, when you're in an office or you're not in an office, kind of document all the minutes and actions from each of the calls. Next slide, Ritan. Yeah, so continuing the communication theme, we use kind of a Slack as our day-to-day messaging tool. A couple of key pointers with Slack is it's very easy to kind of get lost in kind of just communicating via Slack all day, every day. I think encouraging calls when possible, kind of not logging kind of all important documentation in Slack because it can easily get lost. I think you need to use other tools that I'll come on to in the presentation. We ask all kind of engineers to update the statuses. If you're away from your desk or you're out on lunch, just update your status. It makes it visible for everyone to see like what you're doing at the time. And if you're trying to arrange calls, it can be frustrating if you're trying to get in contact with someone and they've got the green icon, but they're actually not at the desk. As you can see on the right-hand side as well, we kind of ask for end-of-day updates from engineers, so it helps, as a PM, it helps you kind of visualize the progress throughout the day. You might have done your kind of stand-up calls in the morning, but that might have been 5 or 6 hours ago, so it's always kind of good to get an up-to-date end-of-day response from the engineers so you see where progress has been up to. I think Deepak touched on it earlier regarding sharing success. I think when you're not in the office, it's very easy to kind of not share success with anyone. So we have kind of a Slack integration called Hey Taco. Got no idea why it's called Hey Taco, but it is. This is where you kind of distribute tacos to colleagues in rewards of recognition. So whenever we're kind of celebrating a small win, we're sharing it on our kind of global or team Slack channels. And again, it's a bit of fun between the teams, and it kind of starts a conversation with other team members asking about certain projects. Ritam, next slide. So we got from a project point of view, I don't know how many of you guys are aware of kind of Jira, but Jira is a kind of a tool that we use for our issue tracking product. This is where we kind of track all the development tasks and progress across the projects. I think as a PM, it's really important that you can accurately track productivity and progress across all your teams and projects you're working on at the same time. So a couple of key pointers with Jira. I think it's really important that you have the right kind of board set up. So we follow a Scrum methodology. We have Scrum boards set up rather than Kanban. And we have all the right workflow set up with the correct statuses. So as a PM, you know which ticket is in which swim lane with the correct status. And this kind of gives you visibility on kind of progress throughout the project. So a couple of key points we need all tickets need estimating, and all tickets must be assigned to an engineer. So I saw a comment on the chat earlier. Again, this helps helps you kind of see who the slackers are, because all kind of tickets would have been estimated before the sprint. And if someone's not logging the correct time, or there's tickets that are blocking other tickets, you will then be able to identify obviously where the problem areas are in the current sprint. For kind of on the estimation part, we use the capacity planner in Jira, so it helps us share the workload and see which engineers are working on which specific tickets. At the bottom right there, linking issues, again, it refers to the blocking point. There will be bugs, there will be issues that are going to block other parts of the other tickets in the sprint. So it's important that everything is linked correctly and assigned to the right engineer and given a prioritization prioritization figure, so you know which kind of tasks are important to work on next. And the releases, as we're working in an agile environment in Scrum, kind of we're deploying at the end of each sprint. So each sprint has a release, and you can easily visualize as a PM how many tickets are left to do, how many tickets are in progress, and how many tickets are done. So yeah, in Jira, there's lots of kind of graphs and reports that can help you guide on visibility. Next slide, Tom. So carrying on with the Atlassian suite, we use Confluence. Confluence is a collaborative workspace and is our kind of central repository for all the documentation for all our projects. So in Confluence, we'll kind of set up company pages, specific product pages, and really it's just a place where all the engineers can review our documentation. It can be a collaborative place to kind of ask questions, challenge solutions, log all the comments, and change requests into Confluence. And it's just a one-stop shop for the whole kind of product requirements, really. We will then link Jira, we'll link Confluence pages to Jira, and you can create your tickets from Confluence in Jira. So yeah, any kind of changes in the requirements or meeting minutes will all be logged in Confluence. So having this one place is extremely helpful when you bring on new starters to new projects or new engineers, because all the documentation is in one place and they can get up to speed pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think regarding collaboration, I think the way we've had to kind of adapt since kind of COVID is especially with our kind of design team. So as Ritan mentioned at the start of the presentation, London was our kind of our main hub in the UK where the product management and design team were based. But now obviously we've all been working remotely. We've had to work remotely with the design team as well. So I think the power of like a whiteboard is being replaced by digital collaboration, digital workspace tools like Miro and Mural. So these are really handy when it comes to kind of brainstorming sessions or sprint retrospectives. They're really kind of engaging tools. So everyone's involved, everyone can create post-it notes, everyone can get creative in these meetings using Miro. And again, yeah, it just brings some fun rather than your mundane kind of Zoom calls that you're having throughout the rest of the day, really. So there's loads of templates that help you guide you to kind of, yeah, just thinking outside the box and being a bit more creative in your meetings. What I would say is when kind of having any kind of creative meeting, as Deepak mentioned earlier, it's always kind of good to do some sort of icebreaker or some sort of warm up, just kind of get the creative juices flowing. We've kind of done in the past when doing our kind of brainstorming sessions, kind of sketch a colleague, or again, fun facts about yourself. So anything like that, just to loosen the loosen the tension in terms of kind of Zoom calls effectively. And yeah, just demos, have some fun and just give a demo. If you're using a new tool, some of these tools can be pretty complicated sometimes. So if you're a facilitator or a PM running a meeting, just give a quick 2-minute demo on how to use the tool, use the key features, because you can see you'll see some engineers or whoever spending the first 10 minutes of the meetings trying to find out what to do and create post-it notes, and it can be a bit of waste of time, really. Next slide. Yeah, continuing with like the designs and design team, I think having like a design repository is essential, especially when you're working across different time zones with engineers. I think designs for our project will change quite a bit. There'll be new additions that are all required. So you can use tools like Zeppelin and XD, where you can update your designs on a regular basis, notify any engineers that have been any changes in the designs. And at least if they're aware and they've been notified, they're not going to spend the time wasting time building the wrong screens, which I've seen happen in the past. So I think we make sure there's an emphasis on the design team to update the designs on a regular basis and make sure all the assets are in one of these tools, so the engineers aren't blocked, because there can be a 4 or 5 hour delay until the UK start working. So yeah, keeping everything up to date from a design point of view can really limit the amount of blockers down the line. So that's it from the tools point of view. There's a lot more, like I mentioned before, there's a lot more tools out there, but that's just a quick summary of some of the main kind of tools that we use on a regular basis. So yeah, I think the last part of the presentation is we're going to run you through some of the ways we've been able to adapt during the last year or so.
Yep. Do you want to go first with your example, Johnny?
Myself, yeah. Okay, yeah. So again, this is, I'm going to talk about a story with one of our lead designers, Eloy. I think we've not really had to adapt because of COVID. I think it's been more of an opportunity for him being able to work remotely. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, kind of Eloy went to travel around Asia and Australia whilst working for Graphene. Obviously, he managed his own diary. He was never kind of late with any of his designs, but he got the opportunity to travel the world effectively. He spent the first kind of lockdown. He was living in a flat in London on his own, and he just had enough of it really by the time lockdown 2 came in. So he kind of told me he was moving to Canary. I thought he was only moving to Canary Wharf. Turned out he's got sun in the background and actually moved to the Canary Islands. So yeah, having that opportunity to work remotely or work all over the world and kind of keep up the work that you said you would do, I think it's a great opportunity to it's a great opportunity to have a great work-life balance.
Thanks, Johnny. Deepak, do you want to go with your example?
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about Slack going down. So, being a services agency, we've had our fair share of, bugs, apps going down, servers going down, as much as Ritam might not like to admit. But this is just something that happens. So when this happens to one of the bigger tech giants, it just goes to show that these things happen in this industry. So in this example, Slack going down for a couple of hours caused us a bit of a nightmare because we couldn't communicate, and we stressed about how communication was important. So it wasn't ideal, especially when you're working from home. I mean, for this, we simply just adapted by switching to WhatsApp and creating a WhatsApp group of the London office. So that's how we communicate for a couple of hours. So that was quite easy to overcome. But there's other examples where, for example, Google went down as well. I don't know if anyone heard about that. It was only for a couple of hours, but we're a Google Drive based company, so pretty much all of our documents and everything weren't accessible. We had to work offline for a bit, which is one of the examples where we've had to adapt to the limitations of working from home and essentially entirely cloud based, very dependent on these tools.
Cool. And then last example I thought, or scenario that I thought worth mentioning is obviously we used to pre-pandemic have all our clients in office all the time. The team was constantly kind of meeting up, as Deepak talked about earlier. A lot of the team has joined since lockdown. And I think one of the things we tried to do was, or at least I've tried to do, is work around it by trying to go for socially distanced walks where possible, or meet clients in a socially distanced environment. But really, how do you create those connections and relationships? Working remotely is something you have to improvise around. So that was kind of the last example I thought I'd share to end our presentation. And I think one thing worth mentioning is that we're very happy to have one-to-one conversations with any individual who kind of wants to hear more or go into more detail with us around how do we manage a remote team to design and build a digital product from scratch. We'd be more than happy to share thoughts and ideas with you, or any advice we can give from a product management perspective on how to create your product. So even after this workshop, feel free to reach out to us. Contact details on this presentation towards the right, and then we'll also share this presentation with you. But feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to have a one-to-one.
Yes, thank you very much, Ritam, and I think some great advice in there. And yeah, I should have probably said you may have noticed that there is a little sign that mentioned at the top, which we recorded this workshop, and we'll be circulating the video, and will be on our YouTube channel, and you get access to the materials. I would stress to you guys before we move on to the questions, Ritam and his team, I think he mentioned 80 odd plus experts in their field. When someone like Ritam offers you a free consultation, I would think very hard about taking that up, not just on the remote working side, but I know that his team have been super helpful to many of our community members when it comes to discussing UX, design, product, and sort of questions on how you go about developing or building a new product. And certainly if you're thinking about building a new product, come and speak to these guys. They've done great work with many of our community. So now we've got some questions from the audience, which I'm going to turn to, and let's deal through with a few of these. So let's do them. We'll do them in the same sort of order that they've come up through the presentation. So in terms on the social side, you know, I guess a couple of questions. Who organizes the events? Is it a management-led thing? Do you have like a social provider? And what do you do outside of the events for introverts or people who are less inclined to join these things?
Deepak, do you want to take this one? Since you organize at least half the social events.
Yeah, exactly. I think with us, because we're not exactly a huge team, it's we kind of just share the load with these events, social stuff. Back when we were in the office, I was pretty much in charge of all the after work drinks because I was very much for that. So I kind of carried on when we turned remote as well. So for example, but you know, it doesn't have to just be on one person. You can share the load, you can delegate. So for our Christmas party, for example, I helped organize, but I also got 2 of our colleagues to help me with that. So yeah, I guess, but then again, on the flip side, in our India office, we have a dedicated HR person. So they were in charge of all these events, all the social events. So you just kind of have to adapt and delegate as per your situation, I think.
Yeah, okay, and I think they, even in that team, you know, a lot of people kind of individually got involved and volunteered with the HR person. So I think with us, it's been less management-led and more kind of individuals of the team who are more extroverted and happy to kind of take on the mantle. And I think it works well because then they kind of they know what others and what their colleagues, etc., enjoy and like, and what will kind of take the box in terms of a fun event.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We have a couple of questions from Anwar. Are you still on the line to ask your questions?
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Yeah,
I've got a couple questions. First off, you know, well done. Like, it seems like you guys really have like a slick operation going on. So yeah, kudos to you on that. Yeah, just a couple ones on freelancers. How do you use the same approach and your same kind of methodology to freelancers? That was the first kind of thought I had, and the second one was based on what was the question? Recruiting and your recruitment process, because obviously dealing with international, like if you've got a role going on, you know, do you headhunt? Do you just get referrals? Yeah, it'll be good to know just from that aspect as well.
So I can answer very quickly the point around the freelancer piece, because we don't have any freelancers on our team. In every geography, we have a legal entity that's set up and everyone's kind of a full-time employee. I think the rationale for doing that was because part of the cultural element, we wanted it to feel like everyone was fully vested. You know, we're all full-time. We are a team. You know, there'll be ups and downs where we'll have more work or less work, etc. But there is one constant, that everyone's part of the company. So we haven't gone down the freelancer route. In terms of recruitment, we've in some scenarios, especially on the engineering front, perhaps worked a bit with recruiters, but generally we've done it in-house. I don't know, Johnny, if you're happy to share kind of how you, because you worked quite well, A, because of your recruitment background, B, because you actually helped recruit the Lisbon team.
Yeah, sure. I think when you're kind of breaking into a new market, say for example, we broke into the Lisbon market and hired engineers in there. If you don't know much about the market, I think it's good to kind of seek advice from recruiters if they're kind of specialists in that area. I think there's always the way up of a business of our size. Really, is obviously the recruitment costs. Obviously, everyone knows it's not cheap. I've been an ex-recruiter myself. I know the kind of the fees they charge. So I think if you've got the time, you can kind of do the headhunting yourself if you know obviously how to recruit. But if you're breaking into a new market, like I said, it's good to kind of get advice from local people who work in that specialist field. Maybe kind of use use a recruiter to hire your important position, like a lead engineer, and then you can maybe get that engineer to kind of go for referrals, or you can hire kind of other members of the team yourself. So I think you got to judge it on a case-by-case basis, really, and how much time you're willing to invest in it will determine whether or not you want to kind of go down the recruitment route or invest the time hiring them yourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Does that answer your questions or no? Oh.
Yeah, that answered it. Fine.
Okay. Perfect. So another question from Ajim asking, what's your opinion on Trello, and do you use it for tracking productivity as well?
Yeah. So I did actually have a slide on Trello, but I cut it out. I was just conscious of time. So yeah, look, Trello is a cool tool to use. Again, it's really kind of visual for a Kanban boards. The way I use it at the minute is mainly for kind of a roadmap rather than kind of sprint by sprint basis, because we use Jira. Jira's got your Kanban boards, your Scrum boards, and Jira's actually not got I think it actually might have just released one, but it's not really got that great a roadmap tool, I don't think. So linking kind of Trello, you can use the macro into Confluence, which can then, I create more of a roadmap feature in Trello because it's easier for everyone to visualize. I then sync it into Confluence, so it's a one-stop shop for everything. All your documentation is in Confluence. So yeah, it's a good tool. Definitely recommend. But yeah, just judge it on a case-by-case basis, really. What's best for yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then a question from my side. I guess you talked about sort of empowering people, and and it seems like there's a really great team ethos there. I think I think it sounds like you guys have achieved it. But in terms of how do you deal with the people who do slack? I think you mentioned that obviously you have a stand-up call, people check in. You also measure productivity against what the developer quotes. But what happens when people are slacking or lagging behind on a regular basis? Do you have any way to keep them motivated, or to keep an eye on them to try and get them to up their production rates? Or how do you guys deal with that side of things?
Sure. Do you want me to answer it?
Go for it, Johnny. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
I can add anything.
So I think you again, it comes down to recruitment, really. How are you recruiting kind of self-motivated engineers? I think, and then it's obviously how are you as a business bringing in projects that are going to motivate the engineers. I think if you speak to a lot of engineers, they're motivated by technologies, interesting products, work-life balance, but also engineering is a hobby for themselves. So a lot are motivated if you supply them with the right projects and the right tools. You're always going to get the person who is slacking, and I think, like I said, with all the tracking tools that we have, you can easily identify who is potentially slacking. And then I think if it's a continuous process, you then got to go down more of a HR process if they're not the right kind of person for your specific business, really. But yeah, I think supplying the projects, the culture, and the working environment, they should be motivated by that. If they should be motivated if you supply it for them. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff.
Yep.
So I think we've gone through the questions in the chat. We've got a few minutes left, so if anyone has any last questions, please put them in. In the meantime, I'm going to say thank you to all you guys for a great presentation. And just to remind you that we will be circulating this video and this materials afterwards. And if you want to connect with Ritam, his LinkedIn is in the chat, as is mine. If you're interested in the free consultation or in joining EC, reach out to one of us, and the guys will be in touch with you. Oh, okay. One last question. There we go. Right. Okay. Great. Thanks very much. Very insightful. Some nice praise coming through. Thanks, John. Question form for Hats. What do you use for international salary payments?
So we have entities in each geography, and we have a bank account for those entities in each geography. And we used to actually just use our bank to transfer money to those entities, but now we've started using TransferWise because they give us better exchange rates. So we use TransferWise at the end of each month to, in bulk, transfer the amount required for payroll in each geography, and then we use a local bank account to transfer salaries from there. But obviously, if you don't have an entity in a local bank account, I think TransferWise is very good.
Yeah, we started using TransferWise as well for my outsourced developers. It's a big
good exchange rate.
Yeah, good exchange rate. A lot.
Yeah,
and the transaction value is like, you know, a fraction of what the other banks pay you. So definitely a great recommendation. Okay, well, that's the last of our questions. So I'll say thank you all for attending. Thanks again, Ritam and the guys, for a great workshop, and hope to see you all at a future event. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks,
Cheers,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.